Hi, friends, and welcome to the Wine CEO podcast. I'm your host and certified sommelier, Sarah, and I'm so excited you're here. Do you ever feel like wine is totally intimidating? Maybe you get overwhelmed shopping in the wine aisle and have no idea what to buy for that recipe you're cooking. Or maybe you have to bring a bottle of wine to a dinner party with your in laws and you're nervous to pick one that will taste awful. Well, I'm here to tell you that wine does not have to be stressful. Each week on this podcast, we chat about fun and relatable wine topics that help you learn and feel more confident as a wine consumer. Friends, after a decade in this industry, I know sommeliers can make wine feel snobby or overwhelming, and the average person truly just wants to know, what wine will go with my pizza? How many glasses is too many at a work luncheon? Or how do I know if a wine is sweet? So join me each week as we dive into exciting topics like these and learn about all things wine related. And don't forget to hit subscribe so that you never miss an episode. Let's dive in. Hey friends, and welcome to episode number 118 of the Wine CEO podcast. We are coming to the end of my mini series on Greece, sadly. There's still 2 more episodes after today, but this is going to be our last episode on a Greek wine region and Greek winemaker feature. So, crazy. I can't believe we're coming to the end of this mini series. I've gotten such great positive feedback. It sounds like you all have been loving it, which has made me really happy. I've learned a ton in this series and it's been a really fun one for me. Today, we are taking a look at Santorini. And you may remember from last week's episode that Santorini is a part of the Cyclades, or again, you may have heard this pronounced before the American way, the Cyclades, which I just learned recently is incorrect. It's pronounced the Cyclades. So there are about 18 inhabited islands that make up the Cyclades, and we discussed Tinos Island last week, but many of you may be more familiar with Mykonos, Ios, Paros, Delos, Naxos, and of course, Santorini. As a whole, the Cyclades have beautiful weather in the spring and summer with average temperatures around 80 degrees Fahrenheit. That's around 27 Celsius, which makes this obviously an amazing holiday destination. But the islands are also very, very windy, very rocky, and the strong wind can make grape budding difficult, which can lead to lower yield of fruit on the vines. In positive notes, the sandy soil on the islands of Santorini have protected the vines from phylloxera, the vine louse that destroyed most of the world's grape plants in both the 19th and 20th centuries. This pest can't survive in sand, so many of the vines in the islands were safe, and so they're very, very old, so that's good news. But the wind makes for a very, very difficult region to harvest. Now, in general, the main grapes in the Cyclades are Monemvasia and Assyrtiko for whites, and then Mandallaria for reds. And while we spoke about Tinos Island last week, the 2 largest islands in the Cyclades by volume of production are actually Paros and Santorini. These 2 also happen to be the only PDOs in the Cyclades, or protected designation of origin, so protected regions. Now, Santorini has a really unique history. Legends say that Santorini may have been the lost Atlantis because it was once an island that erupted in 1500 BC, destroying the Minoan civilization in Crete forever. Regardless, today, Santorini is considered one of the top vacation destinations in the world, and it is also arguably the region that put Greek wines on the international map. The vineyards in Santorini are planted with 70% white Greek grape Assyrtiko, and with extremely windy conditions, the winemakers here are famous for growing their vines in circular baskets on the ground called kouloura. I'm probably mispronouncing that, but kouloura. Now, I'm getting way ahead of myself here. I'm sharing too much already. Let's dive into my interview today with the winemakers at Yea Winery. Today on the show, I had the amazing opportunity to interview 2 of Greece's top winemakers, Yannis and Leto Paraskevopoulos. Yannis and his daughter Leto are scientists who have an incredible passion for winemaking and some other fun interests that you're going to learn about in just a minute. It's a bit of a longer episode, but I promise you are going to love the dynamics of this interview and the playful banter between Leto and her father. So let's dive into the show, and then I'll come back at the end and wrap up our discussion on Santorini. Well, Wine CEO podcast listeners, I am so excited. Today's episode is really interesting for a couple of reasons. We are continuing our mini series on Greece. We're kind of getting to the end here. We're talking about Santorini, and I have one of the top winemakers from Santorini with us. They also have a winery in Nemea. It is Yaya Wines, and Yaya is a reference to Mother Earth. We're going to learn a little bit more about this particular winemaking family, and it's such a unique episode for me because it's the first time I'm interviewing a father-daughter winemaking duo, which is so fun. So I have both Yannis, who actually helped found Yaya Winery in 1994. He is a professor of enology at the University of Athens. So really excited to have Yannis, and then his daughter Leto as well. And Leto is the head winemaker specifically at the Santorini Winery, but she's been very involved in the winemaking at both for quite some time. And I'm going to probably do a horrible job of pronouncing their last name, but I'm going to try it. So it's Yannis and Leto Paraskevopoulos. Very long, very challenging Greek last name. Definitely really excited to have them both on the show today. So Yannis and Leto, welcome to the Wine CEO podcast.
Hello, Sarah.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, it's great to have you with us. So I think just to start off, it would be so wonderful if you could tell our listeners a little bit more about yourself. And maybe, Yannis, let's start with you. Tell us a little bit about how you got into winemaking and started Yaya Wines.
You know, I'm a city boy. I'm from Athens, and there are no vineyards in Athens. So I studied agronomy in the University of Thessaloniki, and then decided to do my postgraduate studies in winemaking. And that was purely by accident. It was visiting Italy and being caught in torrential rain. I ventured a wine shop to get shelter from the rain. And I stayed for 4 hours because up until this moment, I didn't know that wine could be such a complex thing. Basically, I knew nothing. I was 21 and didn't really care much about wine. And then coming out of this shop, I had these huge eyes, knowing I had the what is the English word, an epiphany, that I knew what I wanted to do in life. So then I went to France and studied for another 5 years, and I did all possible degrees. I ended up with a PhD in winemaking. So then, things then one brought the other, and, all my professional life since then, it's in wine.
That's amazing. And then what brought you to starting Yaya in 1994?
I was working as a winemaker in a very big Greek company. The big, very well-known Boutari company for 5 years. And then I was simply sacked. And apparently I wasn't doing a good job, it seems. There I was. And I said, no, this is the time that I should do my own thing. So together with my partner, Leon Karatsalos, we started, very small. Our first bottling was 7,000 bottles. Which means we're like 100 times smaller than what we are today.
That's incredible. And then Leto, it's intimidating when you grow up in a wine family, your father's a winemaker, that you don't have much of a career choice, right? So did you always want to be a winemaker? Did you?
That's not how it went at all. So I wasn't thinking about it at all. Like, it was not a thing. I loved science. So I went to study biochemistry with molecular biology in the UK. I know it's relevant, but again, wine was the furthest thing from my mind. I was never thinking that. I didn't even know if I was going to come back to Greece, to be honest. And so whenever I finished my first degree, then I went on to do my master's in synthetic biology and biotechnology. Again, relevant, but that was not the reason at all. I just got lucky, I guess. And then I was just looking for a job. That's a lie. I didn't want to do nothing. So I went traveling for a year. I did a vintage in New Zealand. So that was one of my first contacts with the industry. But that was really just an excuse to go to New Zealand. And so I was working in a big, massive factory, like didn't really learn all that much. All I learned was that I did not want to work at that kind of thing. Such a big factory, you know. And so I thought for a bit, I was like, nah, I'm not going to do wine. Because I don't want to work in a factory. But then a couple of years after that, I was out job hunting, and I was like, you know what? That's not what winemaking in Greece is like. Because here we have boutique wineries, much smaller productions, family estates, so on and so forth. And I was like, okay, no, that wasn't it. So really, before I properly reject it, I should really see what it's properly about, and not in our family company, because I didn't feel like I would be able to really understand whether I would like it or not, having all of these different other factors playing out. And so I went to work in Cigales, Domain Cigales in Santorini. I was just going to work the harvest just for 3 months, just be like an extra or whatever. And then things just happened. The chief enologist quit at that point. I was looking into doing like a harvest in Chile, but whenever she left, the second enologist came to me and she said to me, look, if you stay, I'll stay. If not, I'll go. And that was my first ever like steady job proposal. So I was like, yeah, okay, cool, let's do that. So I stayed on, and then 3 months became a year. And during that year, I actually had to finally accept the fact that I really, really, really liked it. Because I was in denial. Like I was very reactionary about it, you know. But there was no way around it. So at that point, I felt that it chose me, and not just because I was born into it. But I fought it very hard for a long time. But I do love it. And so then after some time, finally, I came into Gaia, and so I've been working in Gaia since 2019. So, and been head of production in Santorini for the past couple of years. So that's pretty much it.
It definitely sounds like wine chose you.
Just said Gaia, where the name of the company is Gaia, but nevertheless.
Oh yeah, no, it's the same word. I see. He's very particular about it. I don't care, because Gaia and Gaia, it's the same word. It means the same thing. It's not like Gaia means something different in English. It's the exact same concept. And it's written Gaia. Everybody says it Gaia. That you just need to accept it like it's fine. Honestly.
Yeah, Sarah, you may start to realize what I've faced in life.
This is why he's in Athens. I'm in Santorini. Works perfect.
So, you know, when she was 17 and a half, she was a volunteer nurse in Africa. And I would
can we not?
Yes. Nevertheless, thing is, it's a very thin line being on the same time father and employer. And for me, the interest of the second generation, it's not to make copies, wine copies of what the first generation did. So when Leto chose to join us, and after 2 years of working together, I realized that, you know, she's an accomplished winemaker now. And I said, darling, you know, you are in, I'm out. And I will be around if you need any advice. If you feel like asking me a question, yes, I will give you my feeling about it, but it's always your choice. And from now on, it's always your choice.
I love it.
Sounds about right.
This is the exact chemistry. This is the exact chemistry I was hoping to get from this interview. This is great. And Leto, I am very close with my parents. I still live with them. So I understand the constant, balance with your parents, right? And Yannis, I love how you just said that the second generation should not be a copy. I think that's great, because it obviously shows the respect for Leto as a winemaker, but the fact that there's incredible opportunity for innovation constantly. And I think in the wine industry in general, we have to always be looking for, new methods of production because of concerns around global warming. I think we have to be aware of just how things are changing in general. And so I think it's so great to hear that you have this wonderful relationship with Leto, and between the two of you, you're really looking at the future of what's best for Gaia, however you want to pronounce it, to see what's best, which is absolutely wonderful. Can we talk a little bit about, so we have the winery in Nemea, right? And then there's the winery in Santorini. So maybe Yannis, do you want to start off by telling us a little bit more about the Nemea winery and what you focus on there?
Sure, yeah. Well, Nemea is much less known than Santorini. Everybody knows Santorini, but then Nemea not so much. Nemea does only red wines. The grape is impossible to pronounce. It's called Aiorgitico. So for the English speakers, it's kind of your Yitico, if you want to break it down. But I do realize that it's hard to pronounce. But then, Sarah, my line of defense is that Gewürztraminer isn't easy either. But we did learn how to pronounce it. We could translate Aiorgitico to St. George, because literally it means St. George, but then it loses the Greekness, if I may say so. So yes.
Is that really a bad thing?
Yeah, I don't know, Leto, I really don't. Nevertheless, I love terrorizing people, so they go, what? Nevertheless, it is the largest appellation of the country by far. It's like 3,000 hectares, which for Greek standards, it's huge. And it's an area that starts at 250 meters of elevation, and it reaches more than 1,000 meters, more than 3,000 feet. So you can imagine that within this appellation, although it is the same grape and it's always red wines, you have pockets of quality which are very different, pockets of terroir which are very different, because yes, 800 meters of difference. It's a difference in soil, in microclimate, and all figures. So yeah, we have chosen to work in one of those sub areas, which is called Kutsi, and it's been great in many perspectives. And probably the nicest, the most exciting of all is that there are still so many things that we need to do. You see, in Santorini, which we have probably the most ancient vineyard of the planet, and it is basically the oldest, the most ancient vineyard of this planet. We didn't have to do anything on the viticulture side. We just respected the way that the vines grew through centuries. So it was mainly a work in the winery. On the contrary, in EMEA, we have to reinvent, and we have to tune our vine growing skills and techniques in order to really end up having the great big reds that we're hoping that we will have in the very near future. I'm happy with the results that we are having up until now, but I know that we can do better. But that it's not a work in the winery, in the cellar. It's a very, very long and expensive and unpredictable work in the vineyard that we have undertaken for at least the last 20 years. So yeah, it is a process. And at this point, I'm 63, and instead of thinking of taking my leave and enjoy fishing in the beautiful Aegean Sea, instead of doing that, I'm extremely excited of the upcoming new era in the Nemea vineyard. And this new era will be based again in the same grape, Aiorgitico, but in this particular case, it's going to be clones of Aiorgitico, which we didn't have up until now. We had a generic population of the variety, but without having specific clones. And not to mention that those clones will be, exempt from viruses and all kinds of different things that up until now are present. So yes, that will totally metamorphosize our wines at the end of the day. I need to be honest, and I'll make a pause after that. You guys, any non-Greek that it's in the wine trade, business appreciation, they see Greece, they recognize Greece as a country that produces interesting wines. But very rarely they will be speaking about the Greek reds. And it is for a reason, I think we need to be honest. Although our climatic conditions are absolutely amazing for great reds, we haven't done yet the work that it takes in the vineyard in order to express this potential greatness, which at this point it is a speculation, but believe me and give us some time. Yes, within the next decade, I think you will be all speaking about the new red Greek wines.
I think that's really interesting to hear from you. And Leto, I promise we'll get to Santorini in a second, but I'm so curious about this because From the interviews that I've been doing in this mini series, there's been a lot of winemakers really talking about a complete renaissance in Greece and how winemaking was in a very different place, and the impression from the consumer was in a very different place, let's say back in the 70s and 80s, compared to where we are now. And so I'd love if you can kind of speak to that, Yannis, because it sounds like, yes, there's been, a great resurgence and we've come a long way, but you still feel like there's a lot of work to be done. So in your personal opinion, from what you've seen, where do you feel like the most growth has happened then in the last few years? Has it been in the whites, or what's your opinion there?
Well, basically, this Renaissance, it is a reality, but it has various, if you may, pylons, aspects. One was that it was not before the 70s. Greeks didn't invest in winemaking. And they were doing wine as their dads or grandfathers or ancestors were doing, which has an interest, but then it didn't reflect what the international community wanted. After the 80s, Greeks start to invest money, but basically in equipment and know-how on the winemaking. All of a sudden, you had winemakers that had studied winemaking, so they knew techniques, they knew, all the state of the art of making the wine. So there was a huge leap because basically all of a sudden there you had new equipment. Thank you, EU, for that, I need to say. Yes, a good part was subsidies that did came from the EU, Greece being a very poor country back then. But then on the same side, guys that mainly, unfortunately, men, but fortunately now more and more ladies are joining in the trade, the profession, know how in making the wine. So yes, all of a sudden there was this leap where nice, tasty, approachable wines where consumers could relate to appeared. On the same page, Greeks started also to expose themselves to the international market, which they weren't doing in the past. Some would say, but yes, Greeks were always exporting their wines. Well, not really. Basically, they were transporting their wines from Greece to Greeks that lived abroad. So the wines that would hit your coast Greek wines would be on the East Coast of the US, but basically it would be self-restricted in the Greek community, in the Greek restaurants of Astoria, period. They wouldn't exposed to the general public. That changed also. We started to invest money in showing to the people, to the international market, what we could do. We, if you may, up until this point, we were extremely egocentric, and Greeks are egocentric. Having built the Parthenons 3,000 years ago and having invented philosophy, democracy, and all that goes with it, Greeks have this tendency of believing that they are God's gift to mankind. So, if it's Greek, it should be the best. It is the best, so there's no discussion about it. No.
I think that's definitely your generation kind of thing. This is definitely not how we feel anymore about our situation. We're very, very humbled by recent years. Anywho, please carry on.
Leto, this is exactly how it should be. But I'm talking about what was happening back then.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, Greeks, by being exposed to the international market, they realized that things weren't as they thought that they were. So yes, the Renaissance has those two pylons. One, we started working in the wineries with better equipment and better know-how in making the wine. And on the other hand, we started exposing our wines in a different way, more targeted, if you may. So that was basically up until now this Renaissance, always based on Greek varieties. Greeks were bright enough to realize that working Cabernet or Chardonnay or Sauvignon Blanc, who would give any interest to that? We wouldn't be here today, Sarah, discussing with you, and thank you for letting us in, if we were doing Cabs and Chardonnays. The world doesn't need yet another Chardonnay, or not, simply doesn't. The public is always in the quest of new exciting things, but it's not enough to be new and exciting. You also have to be good and consistent. And it's exactly what Greeks are showing today. We are different since we have different, very, very different varieties, but we are good and consistent. That's the motto. So yes, now the next wave of Renaissance will be the one that will emerge from the work that we're doing finally now in the vineyards. So give us some time. You haven't seen yet the summit of what we potentially can produce.
That's exciting to hear. I think it's wonderful to see the excitement around the future of Greece. And obviously, completely agree with what you just said. You know, in addition to being exotic and different, which consumers want, you have to be great. It has to be really good quality wine, or else folks won't come back for more. And I think you're right. I think that's what we're seeing from Greece, at least here in the US. You know, I've been really excited to see some amazing Greek wines that are coming to our local stores. And we don't have a lot yet. We're still, you know, trying to raise more awareness for consumers here in the US. But I think we're seeing great examples. And it's exciting to hear that there's even more incredible potential moving forward. Before we leave Nemea and move on to Santorini, I just want to ask about Retsina, because I think we just talked about, you know, how you maybe had a change in Greece to find wines that consumers could relate to. And Retsina is an interesting one. I think consumers for a while really struggled because they didn't necessarily care for the Retsina being made for quite some time. And so that turned folks off to Greek wine in general. But you all have really leaned into Retsina, and you make an incredible example of modern day Retsina, right? So tell us about why you decided to continue with that tradition.
It's a long story. I wanted to walk out of the embarrassment of Retsina. And there was a lot of embarrassment for many reasons. It is true that, for instance, a young Retsina can be an extremely explosive, fresh, and herbal wine that, that really, it's as if you are talking a mint, and your palate, it has such a herbal character that it renews your experience with food. It can be delightful with certain pairing, but also it can be very, very foul. It can taste like turpentine, white spirit, paint remover, and who the hell wants a paint remover in his glass? Why is that? Well, you see, the thing is that the Retsina is non-vintage because we don't, by law, we cannot print the vintage. But unfortunately, because it contains pine resin, it cannot age, and it has to be consumed young. But since it doesn't print on the label the vintage, consumers cannot really know if it's a young or aged Retsina. So this is one of the reasons of its misfortune. The other thing is that in the old days, yes, lack of knowledge, lack of what the international market would or wouldn't appreciate, led to Greeks poor winemaking that presented wines that were very foul. And if those wines acquired a very negative reputation, well, it wasn't by accident. Thing is that nowadays a modern Retsina with a very good quality of pine resin and a state-of-the-art winemaking leads to wines which have this explosive herbal character, but which pairs beautifully, for instance, with what? With Indian cuisine. You may say, oh, chicken curry with Retsina, how odd. Well, I would say, why would then a stereotype pairing of any sommelier around the world would be Gewürztraminer with chicken curry? It makes no sense.
This isn't, sorry, it's not intentional that we keep targeting Gewürztraminer. We love Gewürztraminer.
Truth is,
a good example.
Truth is that Retsina can be the perfect choice for some pairing, but it can also be a disastrous choice for some other pairings. So it's a very special wine that at least has one huge advantage: memorability. The moment that you taste for the first time this wine, a well-made Retsina, a well-made young Retsina, my God, you're not ready to forget it. And memorability, being able to remember, and the moment that you will taste it again, you go, oh, I know what that is. This is a Retsina. This is a great advantage in a world that now has so many different wines, so many good wines. Being able to, to stand out and say, yes, but I'm so different, and you can recognize me for that. It is an advantage.
That's incredible. I so appreciate you explaining the need to drink Retsina at a young age, because actually in the miniseries, no one's brought that up yet. And so I think that's such an important thing to be aware of. Do you think it would be worth lobbying the government to try and get vintages added to Retsina? Is the government open toward that kind of change?
Good luck with that. Our legislature, it's not very flexible. It's the least that we can say. They're not guys that they're very well known for their flexibility. One, two, first you need to convince the profession itself. So we should be discussing it amongst us, and we should be arriving to a decision, and then lobby for that. Definitely we should. In our case, in Yale, as we're not allowed to print the vintage, we are printing something which is very legal. We are printing the date of bottling, which is the same here actually. So we say bottled in 2022. Bottled in 2022 basically means it is the 2022 vintage.
Great. I love it. That's awesome. Well, it's so exciting to hear that there are some wonderful examples of Retsina and that folks should definitely try it. Just have to find the right one. So thank you for helping preserve the history of that unique wine.
I was surprised to see that last weekend on a New York Times, Sunday New York Times, I think it was Asimov that wrote that our Retsina is one of the best Greek wines he has ever had, which was a surprise because seeing Retsina at this level of recognition, it was a very pleasant surprise.
Definitely. Well, we've been talking all about Nemea, and we definitely need to hear about Santorini. So oh, no, you're fine. So Leto, would you mind telling us a little bit about now the other winery that you all have in the beautiful and very well-known island of Santorini?
Yeah, so essentially our winery in Santorini did come first by like 4 years, but it continues to be much smaller. It's 5-6 times smaller than Nemea. The reason for that is also because of the size of the region, which is much smaller. It is the second biggest winemaking region after Nemea, but it is way second. And also the fact that because it's been growing in popularity, demand, so on and so forth, there's been a lot of new wineries opening up. So we are now a happy family of 21 wineries in a region that is quite small, and also not just in terms of surface area, but in terms of production, because this is a place that is, anyone who's come to the Cyclades, to the islands, to the Greek islands of the Aegean will know it's a very dry place. It's kind of hostile for plants, let's say. That's not a bad thing always for vineyards, because you do want the vineyards to be stressed to a certain extent. Very fertile soils make very tasty fruits, but very tasty and sweet fruit doesn't make for good wine. And that's sort of like viticulture 101. The terroir here does this by itself. It stresses the plants to hell and back. Our yields are incredibly low. In fact, they are less than half of what we are allowed by law. And that is also because the vineyards are very old. So there's a lot of factors that come into play in this island. And the reason why the wine is the way that it is and it is so unique is because of all of them. It's not just the fact that this is a volcano also, which I forgot to mention. It's not just the fact that it's very arid. It's not the fact that it's very warm in the summer. It's not the fact that there's a lot of salt in the soil. It's all of those things put together. But the amazing thing for me is that Assyrtiko coming from this place is really paradoxical, because really it should not exist in a sense. So the world knows South Europe for red wine, strong, alcoholic, supple, full red wine, not aggressive, like very easy drinking and very like comforting and all that, with very friendly acidities. And yet here we are making white wine, this far south, with the kind of acidity that can only be compared to Germany and Austria and Canada, all the while not having to sacrifice the alcohol. So to me, this is Assyrtiko combines the best of all climates, cool climate and hot climate, into one. It's almost unfair for everyone else, I'm not gonna lie. And as a winemaker, working with Assyrtiko is such a blessing, because no matter what we do, it seems the wine is always really, really good. It's a very robust variety. This is also one of the reasons it's robust, because it had to evolve in this ridiculous place that's so very hostile for life. But that's also the reason why right now winemakers from all over the world have started to plant it, from Australia to Lebanon to the south of France. We've broached France now, for Christ's sake. Like we never thought we'd see the day.
If I may,
he's going to have his first vintage this year, so that'll be very exciting.
I haven't told you that, Leto, but it's like a week ago, my phone rang, and there was a colleague, a French winemaker, which I didn't know. So he presented himself
to us, man. It's happening.
And he said, Mr. Paraskevopoulos, he could barely pronounce my surname, obviously. Could you please give me some info about Assyrtiko? I said, yeah, sure, why not? And we chatted for a while about Assyrtiko. And I said, what is your interest? And he said, well, you see, the nursery next to my vineyard, the guy in the nursery insists that I should be planting Assyrtiko. So I thought to myself, knowing the French very well and how focused they are on their own varieties, you know, for a guy from Bordeaux, Burgundy, it's a different country. And he said, well, and I said to myself, well, there is the day, finally, that a French nursery, a Frenchman, is trying to convince a French wine grower to plant a Greek variety. I never thought that I would live to see the day, but I did, actually.
Yeah, so the world is catching on, finally, 20 years after.
Incredible. Yeah,
well,
it's
thousands of years after, actually.
No, the world, when it comes to wine, white wines start to be by far what the consumers are asking worldwide. And at the same time, as the climatic change, the winemakers around the world are trying to find a white variety
We're feeling it, that's for sure.
Is resilient and delivers beautiful results under very stressful, arid, and warm conditions. And, you know, this is Assyrtiko.
So do you think the popularity of Assyrtiko in some of these other regions is because of the fact that it's such a dynamic grape that can grow in different difficult climates, and that's why, you know, folks in France and other regions are looking? Or do you think it's an excellent grape and folks want that profile?
It's if I may, so a lot of the characteristics of Assyrtiko do carry from region to region. The acidity does carry, which is a very important factor of a wine structure. The low pH also does carry. What also carries is the minerality that that Assyrtiko sort of gains as it ages, to the nose particularly. What doesn't carry quite as much is the extreme aging potential, that extreme high alcohol and the concentration of it all. So the wines in other regions, typically the way that we can tell that they're not from here is that they're not as dense. That density, our main theories are that comes from the extremely low yields and the age of the vineyards as well. So those two things you can't really reproduce anywhere else. So it's as if you take everything that already exists in the grape but concentrate it even further. And then we are very, very, very south.
And also put a bit of data in this. Everybody speaks about minerality without really knowing what minerality
Nobody
is.
knows. We have our theories, but no one really knows.
You have to have very old plants, and in our case, Celtic of Santorini has the roots of any plant, any vine on the island are more than 3 to 4 centuries old. So they are seriously old vines. So they do express minerality. The interesting thing, though, is that there are some metallic ions, like sodium, for instance, that do have a saline taste. And when you have salinity, that also boosts minerality, and also it boosts, together with acidity, it boosts food friendliness. And then we measured finally the sodium on Santorini wines,
Three
Assyrtiko wines.
times more.
It was 3 times higher than the equivalent Assyrtiko of the mainland.
Yeah.
Linked to the environment where those plants grow. Then finally, when you combine this very obvious salinity and this striking steely acidity, you realize why, for instance, best pairing that you can ever achieve by far is those beautiful North Atlantic and North Pacific oysters of yours with this freaky wine from this little island of the Aegean Sea. It is mind-blowing.
Yeah.
Guys, go out there, get a dozen of your oysters and choose an unoaked Assyrtiko. It will blow your mind away.
Yeah.
Having said that, or choose a fatty lamb. It will work equally.
I love it. Well, you're making me hungry. It's early. It sounds delicious.
Not so faint hard, man. You need food with it. A lot of the cases with wines that come from Santorini, they are so big, that they will destroy you. So there is that tendency in the island. Some of the labels, some of the styles can be very strong. So again, that is another thing that further supports the whole food thing. And let's not forget that we are Mediterraneans and we've always drank with food. It's a very, very casual thing. And so a lot of the design process that goes on in a winemaker's head a lot of the time in Greece automatically would go towards food-driven wines. In the Mediterranean, always has been. So our traditional styles are mostly like that.
It sounds like even though a lot of other regions are now starting to plant Assyrtiko or produce Assyrtiko, and the listeners are actually going to hear from Tom Barry next week on the podcast about the amazing Assyrtikos coming from Clare Valley. But it sounds like even those other regions will still be challenged to compete with the incredible flavors coming from the Assyrtikos in Santorini because it's such a unique climate. The grapevines are so old, so it just brings a really unique flavor. But you mentioned something a moment ago that was interesting to me. You talked about ageability. And I think that's something that I'd love to speak to for a moment, because you wouldn't typically, maybe as a consumer, look at a racing, vibrant, acidic white wine and say, I need to age this. So talk to me about, why you might age these Assyrtikos and what your thought is on that.
It's a little hard to talk about it really, because I can only speak from a subjective point of view when it comes to taste. An objective point of view would be limited to the actual capacity for the aging of Assyrtiko. That being said, is really down to whoever's taste. It's down to anybody's taste, because a lot of people really, really like fresh wines, and a lot of people like almost dead wines. But the fact remains that we haven't quite found the upper limits of the aging capacity of a well-made wine from Assyrtiko of Santorini. I think, Dad, correct me if I'm wrong, the oldest case of Assyrtiko of Santorini that's been tasted was from 1874?
It was 1847.
1847, so even older. They found this in someone's house that they were clearing out in the States, and it was auctioned and sent it to Santorini.
It was auctioned in the States and was bought by a very dear friend, Daryl Cordy of Sacramento. And Daryl was very kind enough to send one of those bottles to Greece after we have had a dispute about the ageability of Assyrtiko. And when we popped the bottle in the year 2000, the wine was already 153 years old. And it was one of those moments that changed actually my life as a winemaker, and many other fellow winemakers from Santorini that we've tasted the wine together. We were as if we had been struck by lightning. We had to understand why this 153 years old wine was still so vibrant, so alive, so present.
Yeah.
There are reasons, and the vehicles of ageability, if I may say the word, are what? One is tannins. Assyrtiko is a white variety that does have tannins. The second very important vehicle, it's low pH. It's not by accident that two of those varieties that age beautifully, Assyrtiko and Riesling, have
Extremely low pH.
Low pH. I always refer to this young sommelier that I met in the US. He had on his forehand, he had a tattoo with ancient Greek letters, the word Assyrtiko, and on his other forehand, with Gothic letters, the word Riesling. The guy, he was very consistent because those two varieties, if they have
yeah, he had a type, that's for sure.
Striking low pH, which is the vehicle of aging. So one, tannins, two, low pH, three, structure. And obviously, if you have vines that are more than 4 centuries old, that have less than 20 hectoliters per hectare of yield, yes, they have a striking structure. So Assyrtiko of Santorini has all those elements for aging. We often say that, Assyrtiko of Santorini may be a white wine, but surely behaves like a red. And yes, and then you need to say that each nation has an acquired taste. Greeks, for instance, they prefer their Assyrtika steely, with a striking acidity. So yes, young. Where when you refer to French or Italians, well, they have a different acquired taste, and they prefer their Assyrtikos more evolved, where the acidity has dimmed down and has mellowed out through the reaction with alcohol. Yes, regardless how you like them, it is a definite fact that those wines age beautifully.
And I think while we're talking style and stylistic preferences, it's also great to note that there are some Assyrtikos that are aged in oak, right? And then some that are not.
Yeah.
Too?
Well, this is new. It is new relatively, because basically all these young winemakers.
No, it's not. That's such a lie.
What I wanted to say was that use of barriques, use of oak, was always present, no doubt, as it was, as also amphoras. Thing is that using very old inert wood, it's not what you refer to. These were old barriques that they've been used as inert vessels. I'm talking about the use of new oak. This is something very new for Greeks, and actually it has been imported from France, because mainly all this new wave of new winemakers that studied, well, where did they study? France, surprise. So what did they bring back in the country in their luggages? Yes.
American oak.
Not that much so, but what they brought back in their luggages was, well, when we have a grape that is substantial, a wine that is structured, that has a lot of everything, a lot of alcohol, a huge acidity, and a big structure, yes, then it can take oak. And Assyrtiko has all that. It has such a structure. We are fermenting Assyrtiko in new oak, in new French oak barriques, and we can't even see the wood. So structured, so big the wine is that it's the wine that overpowers the oak and not the other way around.
Like we typically ferment, we'll do our ferment for one in a very good percentage of new oak, French American, and also acacia. And then we've left it stay there for 6-7 months. 6 months was the most we've left it. And then okay, then you can see the wood, but it really can't take it. It goes down to the robustness that was said before. It's got such a strong and powerful presence that it really cannot be covered by anything, which means that as a grape, Assyrtiko is a great base, a great canvas, if you will, where you can play with many different styles. It will never get boring. The classic style, of course, is the stainless steel Santorini, the unoaked Assyrtiko. And that's important because we need to establish a classic style out there, because we can't be confusing the world just yet. Slowly, once Assyrtiko has been properly established, then I think the world will start to look into the different styles as well. And I don't think there's anything that you can't do with this grape, honestly. And it's for all tastes. There's a lot of people that don't like oak. That's completely fine. So they'll be glad to know about the classic style, but also the traditional style, which is oaked. But like my father said, it's made predominantly in old barrels. Of course, because there wasn't, there weren't stainless steel tanks just lying around like 300 years ago. So of course it's oaked. They also work with very big barrels of say 500 liters to even like a ton or more. And we're talking about barrels that could be very old, 30, 50 years, made even from Russian wood, which is another thing that's not really well known to the world. All those things don't really give the wine the perception of the woodiness as much as a new barrel would. But it just makes for a more rustic style that's closer to what we know the older wines from Santorini were like. But yeah, I think there's something for anybody's taste with the Assyrtiko, that's for sure.
But let's try to be, don't confuse our listeners. Like 90% of the wine, of the Assyrtiko wine produced on Santorini is definitely unoaked.
Yeah.
No doubt. So the oak, as we know it today, remains a particularity for some labels, and that's about it. What I would like to say, though, is that, white Assyrtiko of Santorini, they're not easy wines. And they're not for beginners. If you're a young person that starts to appreciate wine, try New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc. You can grasp it. It's there. It's easy. It's fruity. It's fresh.
It doesn't smell like anything else.
Yeah. Santorini Assyrtiko, well, speaking about structure, minerality, low pH, and stuff like that, and salinity, they're not easy to grasp descriptives. Not to mention that they're very expensive wines, and they will become even more expensive since they are so rare and yielded so low. So yes, I would say that Santorini wines are huge wines, rare wines, that basically are too appreciated by people that know their wines, that they have spent some few bucks in their lives drinking and knowing slowly wines. They are not for beginners. These are wines for connoisseurs. But then you recognize a Riesling lover will definitely fall for a Santorini fermented in a reductive style, in stainless steel, where a Burgundy lover will definitely go for some Assyrtiko that have had just a bit of oak and being more oxidative. So yes, it's a very versatile grape, and the style of wines that it produces are also equally versatile.
I love that. And I think, I love Leto's comment about not confusing consumers, right? And making sure that there is a particular stylistic normality to the Assyrtiko.
There is a classic. There is a very clear classic, and that is the unoaked Assyrtiko, that is for sure.
I think it's exciting too that there's a great potential with the grape, right? It's complex, it's vibrant. So there's a lot of different styles out there. And so it can really speak to a lot of consumers, which I think is really exciting. And hopefully
with oysters.
With oysters. I love it. I'm going to need to try that. It sounds like a great.
Well, it's mind-blowing, I'm telling you. Muscatella, it's nothing compared to that.
That's incredible. No, I'm really
Already we're seeing an evolution as well, because whenever Gaia started, and maybe up until 5 or 6 years ago, we had this idea of Assyrtiko always having to be the super aggressive, uber acidic wine, and it is. There's no going around that. But right now, we've also started experimenting a little bit with residual sugars, not unlike they do with Riesling, because also we see the trend as well. People tend to gravitate towards that. It might be a trend, it might be a fashion, it might change, but we can do it, and we do it, and it's also very fun to play around with, to see what you can do. Always having balance in mind.
I love
Not
that.
to mention, a winemaker needs to reinvent himself or herself, otherwise they get very easily bored. So what Leto and I do in Santorini, we submerge wines in the sea. We do orange wines in compressed ceramic amphoras. We need to reinvent ourselves. But
I think every single tank was experimental in some way last vintage. That was hectic. So, that was so ambitious, but yeah, it was fun.
No, I love that. I think obviously both of you are scientists, so I love that constant desire to experiment and play. And Yannis, you mentioned something just so casually there, that you've submerged wine in the sea.
Oh yeah.
Well, we've started in 2009. We were some of the very few in the world that did that. It has become viral in a sense. We submerge them and we leave them under for 4 years. And it's not, believe me, this is not marketing or media, although it has a very strong media effect. What you do by submerging a bottle of wine in the water, it's that you basically block the uptake of oxygen. No oxygen goes into the wine. And that dictates a totally different evolution of the wine. When you will taste back to back a wine that has been aged underwater, even if that's in a bucket or in your bathtub, back to back to the equivalent vintage that has aged under normal conditions, the difference is huge. Nothing necessarily better or worse. I'm just saying huge, very different. So we started that in 2009. Every year we submerge 500 bottles and we leave them under for 4 years. And it's funny to see that how then other wineries, very well known in the world, like Champagne, Veuve Clicquot, they've started doing the very same thing many years after we have started. And also, I'm very glad to say that at this point, Greece was the first country just a month ago that regulated that with a law. So now it's
We are now legal.
Yes, up until now it has been illegal, basically. But you do know.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
In the US, for a reason, FDA does not allow those wines to be in the market. We do not know why FDA is so picky about it.
Because the FDA is speaking about everything now.
You need to ask FDA, but at this point, there are around 20 wineries around the globe that they're doing that. And just even today, I received a message from an Italian colleague saying that they want to investigate if different parts of, different bays or areas would have.
Not a thing.
I don't think so, but it's sweet of them, and they ask us to send them bottles that they will age at their waters, and they will send us bottles of theirs for us to age in the Aegean Sea to see if that has an impact. It won't have an impact, but then why not?
So much extra work in tech.
Speaking of the terroir of the sea, what you do basically by submerging it's that you block the uptake of oxygen. This thing has become so media well known that a labor in a winery in EMEA, the moment that we said, I told him that we own a winery in Santorini, he said, there's a guy that does that submerges bottles in the water. And the very same thing was said to me by an Indian doctor in a flight from Germany to the US, the moment that I said that I'm a Greek winemaker, he went, "Oh, do you know, there's this guy, this Greek winemaker that submerges wines." I said, "Yeah, it's me." He just couldn't believe it.
I love
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah, the
amazing.
way I kind of like to look at it is it's almost like non-aging, because wine aging is by default an oxidative process. We have oxidation, the opposite of oxidation is reduction. So because no matter what kind of capping you have in your wine, some oxygen will go in, and that's fine. We want that to happen. So that it's a kind of micro oxygenation, micro oxidation. That is what makes the wine evolve in the way that we know it does traditionally. But like we said, when it's underwater, there is no oxygen in a form that can be put into the wine. So we uncouple the oxygen from the aging, so that we make the aging process from an oxidative process into a reductive process. So it's like the opposite. So it's like non-aging, aging backwards, or like just preserving. I don't know. It is mental. There is a huge difference as well to the outcome. And what we've seen mainly is that what is greatly boosted is the mineral character. Mm-hmm. So this is one of the reasons why one of our current theories as for the minerality of the aromas in an aging Assyrtiko is that it is thiolic in nature, that needs sulfur. Not in the sense that the wine has got reduction, but it is those sort of processes that bring about that reaction that was made as that flinty, smoky character that we love so much. When you look at the wine, even though it's 4 years old, it looks as though like 1-2-year-old wine. None would be the wiser. The acidity is very, very much youthful and incredibly vibrant, though kind of not exactly softened, but almost as if it's coated in a sense. Very, very well integrated, more so than a very young wine. And that's probably the phenolics, because we said that Assyrtiko is tannic. Mm-hmm. And possibly there is some kind of softening of the phenolics that could possibly occur without oxygen. I don't particularly know of a way that happens without oxygen, but maybe there is.
If I can correct you, daughter.
I know you can't do that, but we don't know anything about wine. I mean, there's a lot of things that we don't know about wine.
Well, my darling, for the phenolics to evolve, they
need oxygen. I know this.
On the contrary, what happens with the acidity, it's a chemical reaction that it's unrelated to oxygen.
Spontaneous. Yeah.
It's how acid of the wine, the acids of the wine react with the alcohol, and they're becoming esters. So yeah. So basically, the submerged, it is, as you said, the acidity has dimmed down, although it does remain vibrant, but it's more mellow than the equivalent wine.
Exactly. It's more mellow than a very fresh 1-year-old or 2-year-old, but it's not more mellow than an equivalent 4-year-old, by no means at all. Yeah. So that's it. Pretty much. And there's a lot of complexity. At first, when we first crack open a bottle of the submerged, that minerality is really overpowering. But we see that as the wine opens up, and that is actually another point, you can decant Assyrtiko. That's another way that it behaves like a red wine. You can age it, you can decant it, it's got tannins, you name it. But as we do that decanting process and the wine breathes and opens up, we start to see this amazing complexity of aromas that aren't really that prevalent for a wine that age. And we see a lot of florals that we don't see so presently in other cases. And also some upregulation of the honeycomb aromas, all of that with still present fruits and that ridiculous minerality. So it's really quite interesting, because a lot of people think that it's bullshit, that, like, can I say that? Sorry. Think that is just a marketing thing. It's not. It's marketing to the point that you can do it in your bathtub, and half of the reason why we do it in the sea is because we're a family of divers and we love it as a sport, and we do it for fun also. But
and then we like to use our
bathtub. The science is real, and the outcome is very, very much very much the real thing.
If we were doing it in our bathtub, we wouldn't use it for 4 years, and that's not probably a good idea.
Oh, so you probably want your bathtub.
I think it's fascinating. I mean, I love, again, both of your passion as scientists in exploring and trying new things. This sounds like such a unique niche aging in the industry, and it sounds like others have copied it, which is really cool to see. But what a fun, different way to age your wine. And then obviously it sounds like it tastes so different. So I'm disappointed the FDA has not allowed it up to this point, but hopefully I can have a chance to try it sometime soon, because it sounds really, really
there's
cool.
precedent, so maybe they'll be more hard pressed to do it. Who knows?
If you have time, you and your listeners, you can YouTube submerging Veuve Clicquot, and you would see what the French did after us, of course, copied after us, of course. They submerged 50,000 bottles of Veuve Clicquot that they will stay under for 50 years. And these bottles are already sold.
Wow.
It's quite a while, yeah.
It's incredible.
They went all the way.
I love it. So we've been joking about, the terroir of the sea, the terroir of the ocean. But we were talking a bit earlier, Leto, I think you mentioned, the volcanic soil in Santorini and just the uniqueness of the island. One of the things that we haven't actually touched on yet is how windy it is on Santorini, and how you actually have to grow your grapes very differently there in many ways because of that. Can you speak to that for a second? The kind of basket process of growing.
So the basket thing is very much something that happens only here. And they've been like that since forever, literally since we know, definitely since there's been written accounts. So it's definitely an outcome of a very long and arduous process of trial and error by very, very old generations of winemakers. God knows when that was, when it started, and when it was sort of stabilized, or when it was accepted as a standard. We don't know any of that. They were just like that when we found them, But they are very effective in what they do. So essentially, we have a very dry place that's very sunny, very windy. So the training system of the basket helps the plant to stay low. It creates a sort of wall that protects the grapes from the wind when the growth of the grapes is directed towards the inside of the basket. It allows the canopy to grow over the basket so as to shield from the intense sun. And also picture this other thing. So like we said, a very dry, arid place. So if a plant were to be standing tall above the ground, gravity would be more of an enemy to get the water from the ground where it needs to be to the leaves and the fruits. So in this case, that training system that keeps the plant low to the ground also helps with that. So we don't have to battle gravity as well as everything else. And so, yeah, you know what they say, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So these are very old plants. They're well into the hundreds of years old. That's how they've learned how to do things. So it would be risky to change it. There has been instances. Some winemakers have gone to train vineyards in the classical way with the double royatze, for example, linear. And come hail or heat wave, those were the first to go. So yeah, I mean, we're happy with it. Yeah, no reason to change. Of course, there is because now, there's also the science of agronomy. So we know a few things. We have been able to improve and to optimize, but not completely let go of the system. I don't think we would.
We never will. You see, that system has evolved through centuries.
Yes.
And it's a very tiring and time-consuming pruning system. It's probably 4 times more time-consuming to prune this system than a normal cordon. So why do people lose? You may ask yourselves, why do they go into this length and difficulty? Well, they do it because it's the only system that is sustainable. And that's the key word. It is long, it is difficult, it is expensive, but it's the only one that is sustainable. If we had, as Leto very correctly said, a normal trailer system, we would lose our grapes every second year, either to the wind or the sun. So we are in a sense, we are obliged.
I was going to ask about harvest too, because I'm assuming you can only hand
on
harvest. It's probably very
your
challenging.
on your knees from the crack of dawn. You are on your knees trying to find those few berries, those few clusters that are hiding in these bush vines. It's not easy. Not
People
easy.
that harvest here are local heroes,
Nothing can be mechanized, obviously. Everything
Nah.
is handcrafted. And it's
Yeah.
also part of the cost of those very rare wines.
Again, not marketing. This is the bane of our existence.
Right. Well, no, you're right. And I was just going to comment to that. I think that's a great thing for the listeners here to hear as well, because when you look at the price point of an Acertico, you have to remember that there's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears and a lot of hard work that obviously went
Yeah.
into harvesting the grapes to be able to make this wine. And so that's part of the cost, right? There's a lot that goes into it. Yeah, that's amazing. Okay, we're going to switch off of Acertico, incredible grape, obviously incredible styles. But the last one I want to ask you about today is Vinsanto. And I talked about Vinsanto from the Italian perspective a year ago, the podcast, but I would love to hear from you all about Vinsanto from the Santorini Greek perspective.
Leto will tell you about the technique, surely, but I will tell you about the history. Italians did take Greece to the International Court of Hague for this one case of Vinsanto, saying that the Greeks do not have the right of using the word Vinsanto. And guess what? They've lost the case, because basically Vinsanto means, you need to know that the word Santorini, it's not a Greek word. The name of the island in Greek, it's Thera. But Santorini, like all islands, were at one point of their history in the medieval era, they were basically conquered by Venetians. So the Venetians changed the name of the island into Santa Irina, because there was this chapel of Santa Irina. So Santa Irina equals Santorini. So basically, back then, the islanders were creating this wine, the local wine, the Vinsanto, that the Italians, the Genovesians did love, and called it Vino di Santorini. Vinsanto, it's not the holy wine, it's the Vino di Santorini. And then it's exactly what the court deliberated and said that if a wine, it was a very wise decision, if a wine is called simply Vinsanto, it means that automatically it comes from Santorini.
Yeah.
When it is Italian, it has to precise, and it has to say Vinsanto di Toscana.
Ah, interesting.
So when it's simply Vinsanto, automatically it's the real McCoy, it's Santorini. When it's Vinsanto from somewhere else, it has to be very specific, Vinsanto di Toscana. So yes, so everybody's happy at this point. Surely the two wines, Vinsanto and Vinsanto di Toscana, are so different one from the other, very, very different styles. So even eyes shut, a beginner would be able to say the difference. And I'm sure Leto will be very happy to tell you about how she does her Vinsanto.
Yeah, please do, because I think the Vinsanto from Toscana typically is made from red grapes, right, with maybe some white blended into it. But the Vinsanto from Santorini is made exclusively from Acertico, if I'm not
exclusively, that's right. It's exclusively from white grapes. So it is a white wine. Looking at it, one would be hard pressed to believe it, because its color is a very, very deep amber caramel color, and that comes from the sun. It's what happens when you burn sugar in the sun, is caramel. But essentially, yes. So by law, Vinsanto actually has to be more than one variety. So typically it's made, as it is traditionally made, from a blend of the white varieties of the island. Typically one would dry the grapes, would pick the grapes and lay them out to dry in the sun for about 2 weeks. They would then take the grapes and press them, get the juice, and make wine out of that in a very, very long and hectic process. It's very difficult to make. And then by law, it needs to age for at least 3 years, 4 years, 4 years in any kind of oak. of oaken casks as it was traditionally. Back in the day, we know that the locals were trading Vinsanto with the Russians in exchange for wooden barrels. So that was a crazy kind of vicious circle. They were making Vinsanto. There's no trees in Santorini. We have like nothing to make barrels out of. But we're making Vinsanto anyway. We need somewhere to age it, but we don't have the food. So we'll give the Vinsanto away to get the barrels in to age it. It's sort of a strange little thing. An example of trade. So what I just narrated is the traditional way of making it. Of course, because we are kind of, I would say, experimental, so on and so forth, of course, we make it a little bit differently. So the idea is that you have something that is very, very sweet. The only thing that you can balance that out with is acidity. And so that's driven us to a few tweaks here and there, if you will. So the most obvious one would be that we strive to use as much Assyrtiko as legally possible in it, because of the three main white varieties of the island. Assyrtiko is the one with the highest acidity and the lowest pH. That is a no-brainer, well, for us at least. The other thing is that we do not sun dry for quite as long. We'd go for about a week to 10 days. And perhaps the most important thing is the way that we dry the grapes. So we don't exactly sun dry all of the grapes. What we do is we put the grapes into fruit drying trays, and then we stack them on top of each other and we rotate. But there is a very big, actually probably the majority of the grapes actually dries for the most part in the shade, in a manner that is also freely permeable to air, so that it dries the grapes out. There's no rot. There is no oxidation. It's better quality moss, better quality wine. And also wine that is, yes, it's very, very sweet, but it's balanced out by freshness and acidity in a manner that is not so incredibly overpowering when you have it. So I would say that our version of the Vinsanto is a little bit fresher than would be a very, very traditional syrupy thick Vinsanto. And it's a wine that you can literally do everything with. Not everybody is a great fan of sweet wines, but we see that it can work as a dessert pretty much on its own. That's one thing. You can use it with a lot of desserts as a topping instead of syrup. So let's say, like, I'm sorry to be doing this to you, but New York cheesecake with Vinsanto, or apple crumble with Vinsanto, even chocolate souffle, any kind of chocolate really. Though my favorite one would be with blue cheese. That's blue cheese and Vinsanto, probably my favorite thing on the planet. But we also make like meat sauce. We have it with beef and pork. Just making a reduction out of Vinsanto. And possibly my favorite, not a pairing, my absolute favorite way to serve it would be on its own, but ice cold, served in a shot glass that's come right out of the freezer. It's the dream.
Okay. That was perfect. I love that we got the history as well as the method of production. This has been such a fabulous interview. Yannis, Leto, I can't thank you enough. I think this is actually one of my favorite interviews by far, because I've learned so much and I've just loved our conversation and just the, again, chemistry of how we've been able to go through so much about some incredible wines. I would love to hear, is there anything exciting coming up for Yaya in 2023? Anything you guys are doing that's different that you're looking forward to this year?
Well, we have produced a new red that we will not reveal at this point. As I had said, that starts to represent the new era of Ayurvedico. It's going to be a blend of Ayurvedico with yet another very unknown Greek variety of the Peloponnese. I'm not though sure that we will present it to the public, although the wine is ready. It will be bottled probably this following week. We might not present it in 2023. We will see how it will evolve in the bottles. We might, just before Christmas, possibly. But yes, I'm absolutely excited for this new project. It's going to be just like 3,000 bottles. But wow, what a wine.
Very exciting. Leto, how about for you? Anything this year you're looking forward to?
We've released a couple new labels in the past 3 years. The last one was last year, so they're not really letting me like I want. There's at least 3 things that I want to do, but right now we've released too many new things in a very short period of time. So it will happen definitely within the next couple of years. But we just brought a brand new label, which was last year. It was a single vineyard label. It's called Ammonite. It's a very limited edition, so it's difficult to get a hold of, but it's out there. But yeah, for sure, there's a lot of ideas. There's a lot of drive, and it's definitely going to be new things in the near future. For sure.
I need to give credit to Leto for Ammonite because it was the first release, her first wine in the vintage 2020, and this wine was chosen by master sommeliers around the world into a tasting as the best Greek wine overall, whites and reds.
Wow! So, congrats, Leto. That's incredible.
It was quite an entering in the trade. Yes.
No kidding. Yeah. That's awesome. Well, I'll make sure in the show notes for today's episode to include the website for Yeya as well as the social media so that listeners can definitely follow along in the journey. So whether these exciting new releases happen in 2023 or even in years to come, they'll be able to follow along and see them as they're announced. If folks are, visiting whether Nemea or Santorini, can they come visit the wineries? Do you have tourism opportunities?
Yeah. So both wineries have a tasting room. In Santorini, it's not so much a tasting room because it's open space and it's on a beach, but let's call it a tasting room.
That sounds better.
Yeah. So walk-in tasting room on Santorini would be good to have a booking first, but it's not absolutely necessary. Booking in Nemea would absolutely be necessary, however, because it's a more private affair. So it's held in the cellar. It has to be the production.
Santorini. For your listeners, Santorini, do not visit us and our tasting room on Santorini if you don't like cats.
Cats.
Oh yeah, there's woods.
They're everywhere.
But there's cats everywhere in Santorini, so there's wherever you're gonna go, there's gonna be cats.
I do remember that. I was fortunate to visit Santorini a long time ago, sadly before my wine journey, and there were cats everywhere. It was a beautiful island, but yes, there's cats everywhere. Well, that's so great to hear, because I know it may be difficult for some of our listeners to find your full portfolio of wines in the US. There's some, I was fortunate
definitely
to find a couple, but it sounds like to try the full portfolio, we'll have to come visit Greece. So it's great to know that we can visit both Nemea and Santorini and be able to enjoy these wines in person. Yannis, Leto, thank you so much. Truly, this has been a fabulous interview, and I've loved every minute of it. So thank you for joining us on the show today.
It was really fun.
Have an excellent day. Bye-bye.
You guys, I'm not lying when I say that was honestly one of my favorite interviews ever. Like in my 2+ years of doing the Wine CEO podcast, one of the top episodes. Yannis and Leto were, first of all, so kind and so welcoming. They answered all of my questions even before and after the episode. They were so incredibly knowledgeable, but even more important, they were so fun. I hope that you could feel their amazing passion for winemaking and the history around Greek wines. Whether you were listening in your headphones or your speakers, I hope you could hear it because it was there. I felt the passion and it was just so fun. I could have talked to them for hours, honestly. They are definitely trailblazing some really cool new ways to process wines. And I love that as scientists, they're always looking for new ways to impact their wines through processing and continuous evolution. I've mentioned in the show before that my parents are both scientists, and so I have a special place in my heart for scientists and those who are working to really change the way that wine and just, things in general are being developed. So really, really cool. Master of Wine Konstantinos Lazarakis calls the Yeya underwater submerged wines a cult status wine, and that is a very high praise. So I truly hope to be able to visit the Yeya winery someday soon and try one because they sound incredible and unlike anything else on the market. One of the things that I love most about the Wine CEO podcast is being able to share stories of incredibly hardworking and passionate winemakers from all over the globe so that when you are shopping for wines, you can look not just for a good wine, but for a story. I hope that the next time you're shopping and you come across an Assyrtiko from Santorini, that you think of Leto and Yannis and the incredibly hardworking vineyard workers of Santorini that are harvesting grapes out of the bushes along the ground, and that you just have this incredible respect for what went into making that bottle of wine. Even better, I hope you fell in love with the Paraskevopoulos family as much as I did, and you run out to your nearest wine shop and ask them to find you a bottle of Yaya wine so that you can try their Asertico with some delicious oysters. That is on my to-do list. I need to figure out how to do that ASAP. If you learned something new in today's episode, I would love to hear about it. Take a screenshot of the episode and post it to your social media. Don't forget to tag me at The Wine CEO, or you can send me an email, sarah@thewineceo.com. Sarah is SARAH, and tell me what you are learning and loving. Next week will be our second to last episode in this Greece mini-series, so be sure to tune in next Wednesday as I speak with a winemaker in, wait for it, Australia. Weird, I know, but you heard me right. We are going to be discussing the horizon of Greek grape varieties being grown outside of Greece and what that means for the country. So yes, I'm going to be speaking with one of Australia's top winemaking families that is growing Greek grapes. So super interesting. It's an episode you absolutely cannot miss. So be sure to subscribe to the podcast show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, or wherever you listen to your episodes so that you don't miss it. And as always, if you can please take 2 minutes and leave me a review of the show on Apple Podcasts, that would be a huge help. This is the best way for listeners to find the Wine CEO podcast and to get fun and approachable wine content delivered to them for free every week. 5 stars are great, but written reviews make a huge difference. Big thanks this week to listener Tasting Never Stops, who says, "This is an excellent podcast. The right deep, the right length per session, and a great presentation style. I have listened to several different podcasts on wine, and this is hands down my favorite." That is an amazing review. Thank you so much. I truly appreciate it. The Wine CEO is my hobby. It is not my full-time job. So honestly, reviews like this one are so encouraging to me, and they keep me excited about making more and more content for you all each week. I know that was a long episode, so gold star if you made it to the end of this one, friends. Thank you all for listening. Drink something new and delicious this week, and I will catch you all next Wednesday on the Wine CEO podcast.